Hello, everyone. Miss Peachy again from your WCA Biology class. And I'm actually redoing this video because apparently I didn't have any sound in the previous video, so I apologize for that. So hopefully this one has sound in it. Usually I check, so I'm surprised that actually made it through the checking process. But in any case, we are on Unit 2, Lesson 6, What All Biomolecules Have in Common. And our key terms here are amino acids, disaccharide, enzymes, fatty acids, monosaccharide, nucleic acids, nucleotides, lipids, polysaccharides, protein, and starch. And so there's a lot of terms here. Some of them may be familiar, like starch and proteins, and some may not be familiar, like polysaccharides. So we're going to kind of look at them and what they have in common. So as we remember, um, that in order to make food in the most basic level, plants have to take in carbon dioxide and water, carbon dioxide through their leaves, water through their roots, to be able to do a chemical reaction with sunlight as the energy needed to, or kind of get that reaction going, to make the sugar. So if we look at carbon dioxide and we look at water, the atoms that make them up, the elements, are carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. So those are our most fundamental elements. In fact, these three atoms make up the glucose molecule that forms during the reaction. These three elements make up all biomolecules. So right away, we find out that all biomolecules contain three elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They may have other elements as well, but those three are fundamental to make these biomolecules. And as we can see here, sunlight is being used to split that water apart. The oxygen is given off as a byproduct of photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide is then used to make sugar. And there's that two stages of photosynthesis. We have the light dependent reactions and the light independent reactions, but that stuff you'll get into a little bit later. We'll talk about that in some later lessons. All right, so sugar, glucose, is considered a monosaccharide. Saccharide means sugar. Mono means one. So it's a single sugar, a simple sugar. So monosaccharides are made up of one sugar molecule. This is a molecule of glucose. Looks fairly complicated already, but compared to other types of sugars that are disaccharides or polysaccharides, it's much less complicated. You can see those three fundamental elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and that is all that sugar is made up of actually. So, sugars are considered to be building blocks of carbohydrates. Think of them as the little individual Lego bricks, and they make bigger structures, right? And the larger structures they make are called carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can be things like sugars, more complex sugars, or starches, or cellulose. Those are all considered types of carbohydrates. Um, so, a more complex sugar is something called a disaccharide, and a disaccharide is made up of two sugar molecules. Some examples of disaccharides are lactose. Lactose is a sugar found in milk. It contains one glucose, which we know is a monosaccharide, and one galactose, which is another monosaccharide. There's more than one type of monosaccharide, as well as more than one type of disaccharide. But when you link them two together, it makes a disaccharide called lactose. A polysaccharide is made up of multiple sugar molecules linked together. Poly means many, so many different ones. Polysaccharides, disaccharides, and monosaccharides all have different structures, but they all have the same three fundamental elements: carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Starch is a polysaccharide. This is a type of starch called um, amylopectin. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Amylopectin? I'm going to say, since it's amylase, it's amylopectin. That's what I'm going to say, because that's a prefix that we have in other molecules. But it's a much more complex chain of sugars. polysaccharides. So those are our carbohydrates. They're made up of sugars that are all linked together, either single sugars, monosaccharides, two sugars, disaccharides, or multiple sugars, polysaccharides. So this is our one type of our biomolecule, carbohydrates. There's actually four main biomolecules. There's carbohydrates, there's proteins, there's lipids, and there's amino acids. So we're going to go through all of them here. So then we have proteins. And proteins also have building blocks, the little Lego bricks that make up more complex structures. The amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So amino acids, there are 21 different kinds of amino acids, and you put them together in various configurations to make proteins. So as you can imagine, proteins can be fairly complicated because there's a lot of different arrangements that you can put those 21 together to make. Think about the alphabet. We have 26 letters and see how many words we can make with 26 letters. Well, proteins are kind of like words. They're all these letters strung together to make something that makes sense. So proteins are kind of like the words of the amino acid language. Proteins are also very cool because not only are they linked together, amino acids, but then those amino acids that are linked together are all kind of folded up to make a specific shape. The shape of the protein is very, very important in the function of the protein. When the shape of the protein becomes distorted, then that protein becomes denatured and it's no longer functional anymore. So it's not just what makes the protein that's important, but also the shape itself and how that shape is then used by the protein. So when we look at an amino acid, it's made up of pretty much all amino acids are the same except for the group called the R group. Okay, so um, as we look here, and I'm just going to kind of read through this paragraph with you, the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, those three, make up sugars can also be used to make up amino acids. Proteins are made of amino acids and are used to build body tissues and perform life functions in the cell. The word amino refers to the amino group present in all amino acids. So we have the amino group, which is present in all amino acids. Amino groups contain a nitrogen atom bonded to two hydrogens. Okay, right? Plants absorb nitrogen from the soil. Animals consume nitrogen when they eat plants or other animals. Amino acids also have a carboxyl group that consists of a carbon bonded to a hydroxide group and double bonded to oxygen. So this is the carboxyl group here. And then they have what's known as the R group. And the R group is unique to all amino acids. So all of the other stuff, your amino group and your carboxyl groups, they're the same. But what makes one amino acid different from another is this R group here. And they just represent that with a little yellow box, but generally that's actually like another molecule that's attached there. As you can see here, the R groups are represented in red. Okay. And you can see the rest of the amino acid is the same. So you have all of this, and then you have a hydrogen here. You have all of this, and then you've got this group here, right? So these are our R groups, and that's what makes one amino acid different from another. And these are our amino acids in the yellow and all the different colored boxes here. And they kind of differentiate by the type of amino acid. We don't really need to worry about that too much, but you'll become a little bit more familiar with amino acids later on in biology. So these amino acids are bonded together to form very long and complex structures called proteins. All proteins are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So nitrogen is a kind of a different ingredient that's in a protein that we would not find in a carbohydrate. Our next biomolecule is called a nucleic acid. Nucleic acids, there are two kinds. We have DNA and RNA. So DNA uses a type of sugar called deoxyribose sugar. RNA uses a type of sugar called ribose sugar. DNA is a double-stranded or double helix. RNA is single-stranded. The other difference between DNA and RNA is that they have slightly different um, nucleotides. So, building blocks. What are the Legos in nucleic acids? Those are nucleotides. Nucleotides make up DNA. So it's a little different in that you have this blue and this red represents the sugar phosphate backbone that makes up the DNA. The nucleotides form the rungs of the ladder that build the structure, make it longer. So they're found only in the ladder rungs, right? So nucleotides are building blocks. Nucleic acids store genetic information. That's what's your DNA, you know this, is found in your cells, and it is what is contains the programming to make you who you are, to be able to perform all your body functions, to pretty much do everything that you need to be a biological organism. So it contains a nucleotide contains a nitrogenous base, a phosphate group, and a 5-carbon sugar. Ribose is the sugar found in RNA, and deoxyribose is the sugar found in DNA. And so we talked about those. And so here's our nucleotides. I was a little simplified earlier. The nucleotide contains not just the nitrogenous base, which we see here, but also the sugar phosphate group here. And they are built together, linked by link to form this chain, right? As you can see with DNA, we also need nitrogen. I don't know if it shows that in here as well, but not only are you using that carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, you also need nitrogen to form the nitrogenous bases. They call them nitrogenous bases, but I don't think they're very explicit that they have nitrogen. That's what nitrogenous is meaning. And finally, we have lipids, and lipids are our last biomolecule. These are your fats, and they are made up of building blocks called fatty acids. You may have heard of fatty acids. Sometimes we talk about things, or you may have heard about people saying, "Oh, salmon, it's so good for you. It's got a high in, omega-3 fatty acids." So you may have heard that kind of in passing before, but a fatty acid is what builds up the lipids. So again, you link those fatty acids together to make lipids. Lipids are important. Our cell walls are lipid membranes. So we didn't have lipids, we wouldn't have cells. Well, that's not good. So you do need to have fats in your diet to be able to build things like your cell walls and other things are important in brain function. But again, they are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is. Oh, there's one more thing I'm going to include here because I'm going to go to the very, very end here because they're going to talk briefly about a special kind of protein called an enzyme. So, an enzyme is a special kind of protein that does a job or has a function. They cause their job is to make chemical reactions go faster. So an enzyme is a living catalyst. A catalyst in a chemical reaction makes the reaction go faster without participating in that reaction. So they don't change, they're just there to speed up the reaction. We use something called the lock and key model to be able to understand how enzymes work. So enzymes can either serve as the lock or they can serve as the key depending on their function. In this particular example, our enzyme here is kind of serving as the lock. They have a little site called an activation site or an active site. And that site has a specific shape to it. Remember, I said proteins are folded up into a specific shape, and that shape is very, very important. As you see here, the shape is so important that it fits a specific thing into it, like that's kind of like the key to the lock. In this situation, it is fitting in the sugar sucrose. Sucrose is a disaccharide, so it's got two sugars. What it's doing is it's splitting the sucrose apart. So it's speeding up the reaction of decomposing that sucrose into fructose and glucose. So the sugar, the disaccharide, fits into the lock of the enzyme. And then the group together is what we call an enzyme substrate complex, will actually break apart the sucrose and form fructose and glucose. Okay, so it's doing a job, it's speeding up this reaction. Without the enzyme, eventually sucrose would degrade on its own, but it really is a slow process. So your body needs that to break down quicker. I don't have a picture, but it can also do the opposite here. It can actually also serve as a way to join things together. So if you can imagine that two separate, if we reverse this, for example, and we're just going to imagine this, that there was an enzyme that took two different things and then joined them together to make a complex molecule, that can happen too. So different enzymes will either break stuff apart or put things together. And then it goes on to talk about a specific enzyme, lactase, which some people don't really have a lot of in their bodies. And if you don't have a lot of lactase, if you eat dairy, you can get kind of sick from the dairy. It doesn't make you feel very good. So you're lactose intolerant. And basically, what that means is there's an enzyme that takes lactose and breaks it apart into simpler sugars. Lactose is a sugar. Lactose is a sugar found in dairy. Your body needs to break that apart to digest it. If you don't break it apart, you can't digest it. It passes through your digestive system into your colon, and then there's bacteria in your colon that really love to eat it, and they'll eat the lactose and they'll digest it for you, and that produces a lot of excess gas and stuff like that. So it's really kind of an unpleasant experience for the person who's eating a lot of dairy. So if you have lactase in your body, which is the enzyme, it can digest that lactose for you, and then you don't have that unpleasant experience if you eat it, right? So you can actually take over the counter lactase. There's actually, you can go to the store and you can buy lactase pills, and they will help you to break the lactose down if you eat ice cream or drink milk, so you can still enjoy the dairy without having all the negative side effects of being lactose intolerant. All right, so hopefully there's audio on this one, and hopefully you learned something today. Have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye now.